About a month ago I travelled to the glittering metropolis of Birmingham in order to attend EGX Rezzed, an annual gaming trade show, with an obligation to observe the great digital wonders of the Midlands and bring word of them to the YouTube clans like the nerd prophet I was born to be. Furtive reviewer that I am, I spent the best part of my time there refining the art of simultaneously gaming and taking notes as I stalked from booth to booth, cautiously inhaling the tepid air, an experience vaguely reminiscent of Dungeon of the Endless, some gameplay of which I observed and discussed with the developer. Dungeon of the Endless is an early access game available on Steam, developed and published by Amplitude Studios. No coherent manner in which to summarize it springs to mind, so for now we'll call it a randomly generated roguelike tower defense dungeon crawler in space, influenced in part by Faster Than Light. Is anyone still there? It's actually quite good. You spend the first phase of the game entering new rooms which may contain hazards or useful materials, which can be worked by your characters, though they require power first of all. You cautiously work your way through each labyrinth, managing fairly detailed characters and resources to help strengthen your situation until you find the exit, at which point the objective and the pace of the game shifts. You need a character to escort your power crystal to the exit, and the rest to protect them from the hordes of mobs that spawn when you make your move. Caution is removed as a factor and replaced by urgency, which makes for an enjoyable and progressive pattern of gameplay. Dungeon of the Endless is a game that appears to suffer under the weight of all its features, but actually seems to pull off an enjoyable gaming experience, though the learning curve does seem rather hectic for newcomers. And while we're on the subject of the hectic, I'd like to take a moment to talk to you about Cloud-Built, a third-person platformer with tacked-on shooting puzzle elements developed by Coilworks and published by Rising Star Games. I played this game using a Razer mouse with the sensitivity akin to that of a bowl of jelly watching The Notebook from a tumble dryer, which may explain the frequency with which I became completely disoriented while attempting to wall run. I can't fault the game on its visuals, and though I found it too tricky to engage with, those with the requisite skill, patience or masochism for creative high-speed platforming may take a good deal of entertainment from Cloud-Built. Another platformer with dissatisfying puzzle elements would be Modulate by Polycrime, though this game suffers a little more as a result because the puzzles are the main focus of the gameplay. The idea is to turn various platforms, barriers and springboards on and off in order to activate pressure plates and navigate through each level, and naturally this is complicated by linking different platforms together. It seemed possible to vary the combinations, though I have no idea how I did it because the demo was poorly tutorialized and there was no one at hand to give me pointers. The physics work well, and I actually quite like the premise. It's been greenlit, so we'll see if it improves, but in its current form the game is fiddly and frustrating, bringing improbable amounts of complication to a fairly straightforward mechanic. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's entirely possible to make the simple complex without removing all the fun, as I witnessed with There Shall Be Lancing, a game by Sophie Holden that revolves around everyday notions of jetpacks and jousting. It's a two-player game, the object of which is to hit your opponent before they hit you. You can charge in 4 directions, and also block in the corresponding direction to protect yourself. Being stationary allows for your power bar to fill, with a greater power level meaning a faster strike and a smaller chance of your opponent blocking it. You might think that this would cause some sort of standoff for the majority of each round, but each player is provided with a missile attack that fires at the space directly opposite them. This means that lingering too long can lead to an unexpected defeat, seeing as the missiles can't be blocked, only dodged. You receive only 3 missiles per match though, so they have to be timed well. It's a very finely balanced game and it's a lot of fun to play with friends. The only drawback in my experience with the game was that the slow and ineffectual nature of thrusting a lance at low power rather reminded me of the impotence of my tiny keep as a top-down procedural dungeon roguelike with adorable character models and pleasing dynamic lighting. It's being developed by Fee Games and published by Digital Tribe. Rather than the drudgery of predictable looting and incremental upgrades found in most dungeon crawlers, your ability to survive hinges greatly on your ability to find a simple sword and shield hidden in the maze. There are intelligent enemies and environmental hazards littered around the keep, and you'll spend a lot of your time using the latter to evade the former as you struggle to find basic equipment and a way out of the level. Perhaps counterintuitively, by stripping the combat down to simple blocks, strikes and evasion, fighting is much more tactical in Tiny Keep in comparison to many of its contemporaries, thanks in no part to the capable AI. It's an absorbingly frantic and punishingly difficult game, and at the time of my observation only 3 of 51 valiant knights of Birmingham survived the demo. That morbid note brings me haphazardly to Murdered Soul Suspect, a title that has retreated into relative obscurity since its announcement back in February 2013, in spite of its approaching release. It's under development with Airtight Games and is set to be published in June by Square Enix. As AAA titles so often are these days, Murdered can be pigeonholed rather easily. In this case we consider the game to be a supernatural LA noir with a possible possession element akin to that of Beyond Two Souls. Though graphically strong, I should point out that at any given moment at least 3 of the 4 machines at the booth I happened to be skulking near were playing cinematics, and though I'm intrigued by the premise, there still isn't much to go on as how the gameplay will turn out. I will say that witnessing your character's murder at the open of the demo captured a fair degree of creepiness though. And it would hardly be fair to bring creepiness into this without mentioning Murasaki Baby from Obosonico, a puzzle game designed for the PS Vita starring a small child with a large head confronting a dark and frightening world. This is a phenomenon observed by Zero Punctuation that remains a staple of less traditional video games. Regardless, it made good use of the Vita touchscreens as solutions to puzzles, most of which rotate around ensuring both the child and her balloon, a sole source of comfort, are safely escorted across the nightmarish landscape without her becoming paralysed by fear or preyed upon by the creatures and dangers you encounter. A more adult entry of an arguably similar genre would be Alien Isolation, the demo for which I played. First impressions revealed a very well realised and detailed environment, right down to the chewing gum under the desks. The premise is similar to the Alien films. You're trapped on a spaceship and there's an alien or xenomorph on board. Equipped with a radar that reveals the proximity of the xenomorph whilst also blurring the foreground, your job is to navigate the ship performing the mundane tasks necessary to rescue yourself, much as in Dead Space. You have no chance of defeating your enemy, and running will likely alert it and spell your demise, so in theory the game should handle like Amnesia in space, but it doesn't. Encounters with the xenomorph are incredibly scripted along with a few other token jump scares, and while it will usually succeed in getting a few cheap moments of shock to begin with, it's a device that becomes tired pretty quickly. Kind of like in Dead Space. For what it's worth, the stealth gameplay can be quite challenging when it gives the impression of freedom, but those moments are few and far between, leaving Alien Isolation on track to be a real waste of an excellent environment and premise, much like Dead Space. Now on to another waste. Land 2. It's a fairly well-known tactical RPG from In Exile Entertainment, currently in early access beta on Steam. I was first impressed by the character creation options, which were many and varied, even allowing you to write your own character bio and saving it for future use. Having accurately chronicled the legend of Fartface, a capricious and mysterious adventurer allegedly responsible for converting the world to wasteland, I took a quick peek at some of the mechanics. I appreciated the presence of voice acting, though what I found most endearing was the element of exploration measured against water rationing. You need to discover oases in order to keep your followers adequately hydrated as you quest throughout the desert, though outside the confines of your base camp, you're prone to random encounters, so there's a strategic element to the game. The combat also looks to be fairly tactical from the trailers, though it is turn-based and failed to impress during my time with it. It bears the age-old problem of having a character swing a lead pipe at an enemy from point-blank range and miss twice in succession, and that doesn't take very long to put me off these days. As it is, it's a very traditional and well thought out RPG that does what it does better than most, but I doubt I'd have the endurance or enthusiasm to ever complete it. While discussing the revival of traditional games, it seems as good a time as any to bring up Stronghold Crusader 2 from Firefly Studios. A mere fledgling versus mode alpha when I met it, this entry into the series of strategy castle building simulators that occupied most of my childhood looks to pick up the same approach to gameplay as the first Crusader, with the skirmish and online modes being the focus. Besides the tidier graphics and UI, Crusader 2 offers a new range of units designed to make the combat more tactical. These include larger siege engines, healing and buff units, and more mounted units. The idea is to refine the AI and balance the different troop types with new abilities and the capacity to counter specific opposing troop types in order to liven up sieges and battles, with some of the economic systems from Stronghold 2 and 3 being trimmed. The development I was most interested to hear about was the proposed inclusion of a co-op mode that would allow 2 online players to manage the same castle, dividing tasks and forces as they see fit, so that the focus remains on strategy rather than APM with online multiplayer. The overall sense is that we're being treated to a more refined and modernised version of the same Stronghold Crusader. That's more of a difference than you're likely to find between Hotline Miami and its sequel, which I was fortunate enough to try out. Hotline Miami 2, Wrong Number, is being developed by Denaton Games and published by Devolver Digital, and for this particular critique I'd like you to imagine the original Hotline Miami, but with a little bit more of a 90s feel to it and almost imperceptibly more difficult. Fairly straightforward then, but it's worth mentioning that this was a deliberate and potentially even artistic choice. The first game essentially established that the story doesn't really matter because players will become hooked on the swift and gaudy ultra-violence, and doesn't that make you an awful person? The demo for the second game intermittently observes an actor accused of selling out for appearing in a teen horror film, who then callously admits to enjoying the violence during a surreal talk show interview. I've always been keen to take the simplest possible interpretation of a game that hurts the eyes after relatively short periods, so I'm going to assume the snippet is basically dismantling, or rather obscuring through thinly veiled pretense, the revelation that not only do gamers sometimes play violent games without caring about the story, but they also come back for more even if there's no significant difference in the newer product. At this point I'd like to congratulate Hotline Miami in its graduation from the Activision Academy of Insight. Now, if you were to strip back the garishness and borderline abusive customer relations, you might be startled to arrive at something similar to Super Pinata Pro, a two-player fighting game by Ed Paris, or Empika, who also works for Mediatonic, the people behind Foul Play. The object of the game is to be the player to break open the piñata, which usually boils down to letting the other player do all the work and then jumping in at the last moment to claim victory. You can also choose to hit your opponent with your bats, temporarily incapacitating them while they violently throw up their liver. Ultimately, this turns what would have been a charming recreational activity into an ultraviolet nightmare that will corrupt your very soul, but the gameplay is fun and addictive, so you'll keep coming back for more, won't you, you capitalist shills? This actually leads me neatly onto Hotline Miami 2. I've already covered that one. Gang Beasts then, because of the consumerist beast inside of you all, albeit this is a greenlit pre-alpha that's currently freely available. Created by Bone Loaf and described by a friend as a real-time Tory bash, it's currently a 4-person local multiplayer brawling game where you each play as a vaguely humanoid blob of stuff, fighting for the dominance of various imaginative arenas. If any of you happen to play Little Big Planet in the correct fashion, which was to slap your friends off the edge of platforms until only you remained, then you should already be well acquainted with the predatory instinct required to succeed in this game. It's worth noting that you also have grabbing and lurching as part of your arsenal, with the former often leading to desperate and hilarious struggles for survival. The game as a whole looks greatly entertaining and proved very popular with other random people from the internet. All that it needs is online multiplayer, although friends and a sofa could serve as an adequate substitute should you happen to have them. Another multiplayer game designed with friend sofa interfacing in mind is Overruled. This one's a sort of objective-based 2D brawler from Dlala Studios. The premise is that every so often the game mode changes. One moment you could be playing King of the Hill, and then it might abruptly switch to my personal favourite, which is Man on Fire mode, essentially immolation tag. There are also pickups that you can employ to hinder your friends, nerfing their speed or the rate at which they accumulate points. Overall, I like the idea behind the game and I did have fun playing it, but the core gameplay of basic platforming and combat is a tad on the clunky side and detracted from the frantic pace the game tries to establish. Another potential issue is the UI, which displays the game mode and needs checking constantly so you know how you're supposed to be trying to win the game. However, I played with 3 other people sharing a single large display. Trying to keep track of what your objective was on top of focusing on the gameplay was akin to trying to choreograph a contemporary dance that doesn't start from a lying down position, which is to say impossible. Hopefully these issues can be ironed out because Overruled is a game that demands your attention but earns it, much like this next game. Unrest from Pyrodactyl Games is what we're moving on to, and I should mention that I had already backed the Kickstarter for this game before I gave it a try. Anyway, reluctant as it is to jump into any kind of pigeonhole, I'm going to provisionally describe it as a top-down, dialogue-based RPG. The basis of it is that you play against the backdrops of both rural and urban ancient India at a time of civil strife, adopting the roles of characters in a range of societal positions and the dilemmas that come with them. In the demo, I played as a young girl in a rural village forced to deal with an arranged marriage to an altogether unenthusiastic suitor who believed himself deserving of a wife of greater status. You can probably gather from this that it's no casual experience, and it was indeed difficult to compile an experience from the short amount of time I had with Unrest. I did encounter evidence of a wider-ranging moral spectrum and detailed character backgrounds, and the developers explained the fairly deep and dynamic means by which you can interact with the characters and alter your relationships with them from the presets that are given based on their history between each character. It has a plot that encourages exploration and interaction by choosing not to lead you by the hand. For example, I spotted a horse in a stable while I was making my way through the village, and my character observed that she'd never ridden a horse. How you choose to interact with that horse or use that information in a later point in the game is for the player to figure out and possibly decide. Overall, I was pleased by what I saw with Unrest because it's shaping up to be the game I backed. For those unsure of whether or not they could get into it, I'd consider it to be mechanically similar to Postmortem One Must Die, but with a subtler plot. As I said, you'll need to be paying attention, but it provides interaction that can be both meaningful and enjoyable, as well as having a leisurely pace of play. And since we've considered the topic of a leisurely saunter through ancient India, we might as well consider a leisurely saunter through another person's memories, an experience provided by Ether 1 from White Paper Games. As serene as it sounds and indeed feels a lot of the time, the game is structured around the difficult issue of dementia. While exploratory by nature, the purpose of the gameplay is to find fragments of memories and restore them, a futuristic vision of a cure for the illness. You can breeze through the picturesque levels by simply finding the fragments and pressing a button, but there's an optional puzzle element to the game that rewards you with a much fuller narrative. They're challenging but doable and allow you to utilize a rather intuitive mind bank, where you can store items that may be of use to you in the future. Ether 1 could be compared to the Moon, but besides being more mechanically accomplished, it also has greater success in creating an ambience that brings the subject's memories to life, rather than relying on character-driven drama to deliver the game's full worth and emotional undertones. It takes a different approach to the narrative than Unrest, but also delivers a similarly leisurely and enjoyable experience that anyone who enjoys first-person adventure games could appreciate. Now there's a fine difference between the leisurely and the sluggish, and this is a point illustrated nicely by Containment Protocol, a game from Zyotix Studios that's tricky to classify as any particular genre. The good people at Razer capitalized on a second opportunity to hamper my gaming experience, this time using their headphones to deliver the exceptionally sharp and unpleasant sound effects in the most excruciating manner possible. The essence of the game is that you control a quadcopter, which in this case is a sort of hovering hacking robot, although it's not technically a robot seeing as you are in fact controlling it, and labelling the gameplay mechanic as hacking aggrandizes the fact that all you need to do is move at a very gradual pace from green dot to green dot, waiting at each one for about the time it takes for the sound effects to perforate an eardrum. Visually the game was quite original, and from what I could gather the story was fairly interesting, told as it was through emails that you hack inverted commas. But the game ran out of momentum when I reached the set-piece finale for the demo, which somewhat fittingly took the form of a 20-minute countdown before a bomb goes off. Oh no, 20 minutes? I'd best be quick taking the dog for a walk so I can knuckle down on this marginally impending crisis by mid-afternoon. To finish on a brief but positive note, I also had the opportunity to meet a couple of representatives of the charity Special Effect, essentially an organisation that modifies gaming interfaces to accommodate for gamers with a range of disabilities. Their innovation goes as far as to provide sensors that can track eye movement as a means of steering a car, and I think that's a technological accomplishment that would be impressive on its own, but they go one step further in making it available for virtuous reasons. An overriding message from my experience at Rezzed and my short time at the Special Effect booth is that video games provide a delightful medium of artistic entertainment that deserves to be inaccessible to no one, so do check them out if you get the chance. That actually draws this mammoth anthropomorphic analysis to a close, and it's one that's been plagued by delays for a whole number of reasons, not least among them the fact that I was forced to write nice things about games I actually enjoyed, which is always a struggle when you reach your cock joke limit at an early stage of the creative process.